Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host tonight, ObjectivelyDan, and this is the live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where we want to talk to you about what you believe and why. And every single week, I always have a special guest. This week is no different. It's Josh Entner. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the welcome. I am happy to be here. I already told you I've seen every single, or listened to every single episode.
Yeah, okay. So let me tell you about the conversation I just had with Josh before the show. Okay, when did we schedule you, Josh? Like a month ago, something like that.
Yeah, like a month.
We were like, hey, you have a podcast where you talk about horror movies and you're into skepticism, and we had this conversation. It's like, okay, we'll get you on. You have listened to every single episode of Truth Wanted since that conversation.
No. I'm on an admin in the Facebook fan group. I've been in a part of this community for a while.
Yeah,
I've watched it. I've listened to it from before then. It's like a month.
But you caught up, though. That's the point. You caught up. You went back and listened to all the ones you didn't do, and you've now heard all over, I don't know, 100 plus episodes at this point. I can't
remember how many there are. I thought you would know that a little bit better.
You'd think I'd know it better too, but that's the thing, Josh. I don't. And the fact that you did that is crazy. That's all I'm saying. That's ridiculous, but I appreciate it nonetheless. That's all. And you listen to all the other ACA shows too. Like you've been listening to it, but
I'm an admin on the fan group, so I have to I have to keep up with the content because people will come in and complain about something that you guys said, and I have to know the context for that.
Right.
So you guys make my job more.
I'm just saying, Josh, nobody comes onto my show, okay, and is like, yeah, I've listened to every single one. Like that's I'm honored, to be honest with you. I'm honored.
That, like, at least with the first 10 episodes, you could have had a couple of guests that had listened to every single one.
In the first couple of days, it was easier, right? Because there wasn't as much to like go back to, but now there's a lot. Like I'm just impressed. That's all. I just want to point that out. I'm very impressed by your research skills, and we'll talk about that a little bit here too, Josh, because you produce a podcast about horror movies. Is that right?
Well, action and horror, but I also try to like lean into skepticism in it because I'm friends with a lot of people within the horror communities, and I've noticed their epistemology is terrible. A lot of them believe in ghosts, a lot of them believe in cryptids. Good people, but just like they'll believe anything they hear. So I've been trying to like lean into the skepticism a little bit, even also pushing the atheism where that's appropriate for me to be open about that. We even had an episode where my co-host was talking about exorcisms that his grandfather performed in front of him. So like,
oh man,
we've gone off on some weird tangents into the world of skepticism, into the world of weird Christianity rituals and shit like that.
I mean, I just imagine that people who are into the horror genre in general are kind of just probably, as a rule, more open to the supernatural, right? Like,
it's weird though. Like you do see like Seth Andrews drops horror knowledge all the time on his page. So there are skeptics that can appreciate horror and just like, I like dissecting where I would go, where I'd be in a horror movie to where I'd start believing that something supernatural is happening. Like,
right.
Everybody always gets mad at the angry spouse that's not believing the wife right away when she says she saw a ghost in her room. Because I would most likely be that guy saying like, your imagination was probably playing with you. I've done ghost hunting when I was younger and less of a skeptic. And there are some things that I had believed that I had seen before. And I look back at it with a skeptical mind and I'm like, no, you saw like a shadow move, but you haven't gone into like all the places, all the reasons for why that had happened. You just automatically, you're in that frame of mind that says that was a ghost or that was a shadow creature or something like that.
Right.
So like,
right.
You learn to watch horror movies differently.
Yeah, I've never been a big horror guy, but when I was a kid, I was really into the ghost hunting stuff. Like I looked at those ghost hunting shows with awe because I was like, oh yeah, some of that's probably not real, but like, how do you explain that audio? What? That's crazy. And I didn't understand how like post production worked and stuff like that. But
Well,
you
like
know,
we did an episode on the movie Grave Encounters, which it's fake, it's found footage from movie, but it still talks about the ghost hunting equipment and stuff like that. And the biggest pushback I got from people was me talking about how yes, all that equipment does do something. There is some scientific work done into the equipment, but it's not scientific work towards going towards ghosts. It does exactly what it's programmed to do. Like there's the ghost box or spirit box that is programmed to find like radio signals, and like it'll keep searching back and forth for a response that works towards what you said. That showed up in the movie, and I said that's all bull. There's no reason to believe that that was a ghost. It's cool. Like my friend who said he got a response from it, he said that it responded to whiskey, which you're going to find whiskey ads on the radio that you're going to pick up. And it like happened to correspond with what he had been asking the ghost about, which I don't know why you're asking a ghost about whiskey. Maybe they died knowing the good whiskey to drink for.
Yeah, maybe that's their hobby and they knew about that. I don't know, man. I would love it if more people asked me about my opinions of whiskey instead of some of the questions people ask me. But we don't get to choose these things, right? But anyway, Josh, you're an aficionado of movies. You can even see your movies right now in the back here. I want to talk to you because today is Good Friday. I don't know if you know that. Did you know today was Good Friday? I had to be reminded.
I thought it was a so-so Friday, honestly.
It's a fair point. It is Good Friday. I don't know why they said, hey, the time our Lord and Savior died and got tortured, let's call that the good day.
Well, did we check his thumbs on the cross? He might have been giving thumbs up when it was happening.
Maybe so. I don't know. I guess it's good for humanity, but like not good for him. Regardless, right? It's Good Friday. I want to talk about like some Christian movies in particular. We don't talk a lot about movies on this show, but you have done a few episodes on some Christian movies that you've seen, and two in particular that interest me. One of them being the very famous God's Not Dead, the other one being the Left Behind series. So I want to talk about Left Behind for a second first. Tell me what you know about Left Behind for those who don't know.
Well, Left Behind is the series about the rapture, and this is an episode that was not part of my regular podcast. Sorry, my dog's going off right now. This was a team up I did with a Skeptic Takeout, where we were able to go off genre and talk about Christian movies. And Left Behind is the movie that I've talked to most of my ex-Christian friends saying that it was the movie in the book series that scared them to death. Because for me, I've never been religious, so I read it in just terrible propaganda, preaching 90% of the time, like very much of a man looks at a woman and he's committed adultery in his brain just because she looks so damn fine to him and stuff like that. And then the movie was worse somehow. Like it was, Kirk Cameron could not bring himself to be the adulterous guy, or at least the guy that thought about adultery. So he made himself the news reporter, even though he was more of a secondary character in the book. And the whole thing is basically them trying to make themselves become better people now that the rapture's happened, and they're going to have to join the tribulation force for what's coming ahead, because the Antichrist is going to reign. And the signs of the Antichrist are something that you constantly see in the real world. People like, oh, this leader's talking about peace. That's somehow a leader talking about peace is a sign of the Antichrist. So like you can point that out to any leader that's ever done a speech before.
Yeah,
and it's just like
I want to rewind a bit, okay? Because you read this book and thought, oh, this is garbage, right? Like this isn't worth people's time. I read Left Behind when I was a kid, and I didn't actually realize there's a difference between the main Left Behind series and there's a Left Behind series called literally Left Behind the Kids, where it's just about young adults like in the rapture. And that's the one I read. It was in my elementary school teacher's like little books that you could check out in her classroom. And I read a couple of those, but there's 20 of those things. I only read a couple of them, but
there's 40 of the kids books and there's 15 of the main series.
Oh man, they made bank off that. That's crazy. But look. I read these books, Josh, and this freaked me the fuck out. Okay, because I'm a young Christian boy at this time, and I'm thinking, well, obviously people have different takes on theology, right? But like this was supposed to be like kind of what to expect. Like this was somebody's fiction. I just assumed, well, they read the Bible, they must know what they're talking about with all this stuff. And man, this stuff is scary if you like don't know how to distinguish fiction from reality, right? Like it's you know,
Well, most people can't distinguish fiction from reality.
that's
Movies
true.
can constantly put based on a true story for something that was like inspired by something. Like Texas Chainsaw, was inspired by somebody in Wisconsin. So that's how loose it has to be for it to be a true
That's
story.
true, but I'm talking about when I'm 8 years old here, okay? And like I'm also going to church and hearing about this thing called the end times and thinking, "Oh man, there's going to be like scorpion beasts and stuff. Like what the fuck?"
Yeah,
Like
it would be scary if you believe this. If I luckily had a Christian mom and a Jewish dad, and they were going to let me choose which religion made most sense to me, and neither of them did, so I just stayed an atheist. So I never got like indoctrinated on all this stuff. So I can see it's bull. It's just like a really poorly written story with probably like one good scene at the end, and then even the movie messed up the one decent scene in it. So like it's bad propaganda. But if your parents are only giving you, as I know, I've had a lot of religious friends that they could only watch certain movies, so you're not even like aware of the fact that you're watching propaganda. You think
yeah,
you're watching like a truly good film, and if you haven't seen enough films, your taste is terrible, so it's gonna be scary for you.
sure. Sure. I mean, I've never actually seen the movie. I know Nicolas Cage is in it, which
Well,
is
no, that
fascinating.
we did the Kirk Cameron one because I'm
Oh,
actually saving.
oh yeah, that's right. I
I'm a
forget
huge
there's different ones. Explain the difference there, because I don't know if
Oh,
everybody
I'm
knows
a
that.
huge Nicolas Cage one fan, so I'm saving that for when we do it, cover it on my podcast. But this was a crossover I did, so we did the Kirk Cameron one, which Kirk Cameron decided, unlike Nicolas Cage, decided not to play the lead character in the book, which is Rayford Steele, a badass name for a lead character in a terrible story. I think he just worked the story around it. But the main focus on that is he's been lecherous and has wanted to have an affair, never has an affair, just thinks about it. And then he ends, the rapture happens, his wife and one of his children is raptured, and then like his one daughter that has a lip ring, she's the only one that stayed down on earth with him, and he has to convince her to accept Jesus Christ now that they understand that the end times is coming, and they're going to join up a tribulation force to go against the Antichrist. The worst part about it, and this is what scares most of my Christian friends, is there's a character who's a pastor who didn't believe the right way, so he didn't get raptured. So it's very much getting you need to believe exactly how we tell you, or else you're not gonna get raptured into heaven.
Yeah, I mean, that is really fucked up because that's a very like American way of viewing Christianity. I feel like because well, I mean, it's evangelical in particular, but American evangelicalism and you know, Western evangelicalism really talks about, you know, hey, you have to spread the literal word of God, the word being the good news, you know, that Jesus has died, and you accept in your heart. And if you don't, you will go to hell. Like that is the aftermath. If you've never heard of God, your status is kind of up in the air because like limbo's not a thing for most Protestants, and if you're not saved, you're not saved. So
They're going to have a
very
chance. There's going to have a chance after the end times have happened, after everybody's been raptured, to like see there was proof. Everybody's clothes is on the ground. That now you see that God exists, but still somehow everybody's still going up against it and
right, but also
not
like
believing it.
when you have people like just immediately leaving their clothes from like cars and planes and stuff, like people are going to die who aren't believers like very
Honest,
soon after it happens. So I don't know if that's a great second chance. I don't know if that gives a lot of people enough time to like fully evaluate what's happening there.
well, in the book they do, and in the movie they do talk about how people are gonna die, but as long as they're dying, believing and fighting for it, that they may have a chance to redeem their souls or whatever. So like it's very hard up on the propaganda, but it's just like, and honestly, if you take out the religious elements and just half the population disappearing, it's a very good movie. It was called Endgame. So like there was
Yeah.
there was a way to make this interesting, and they still
But
somehow made the most boring story ever
Endgame,
made.
Josh, Endgame had Iron Man. Okay, Left Behind has Kirk Cameron. I like one of those is just inherently going to be more entertaining than the other. I don't know. Like I'd be curious to watch these movies to see how I feel about it because I've never seen any Left Behind movies. But if they're like the books, which I can now evaluate as like garbage, I'm sure they're not super great. So I'm glad I can get your opinion on
Well,
that.
like the CGI, even for the time, was pretty terrible. So it's just like, even from just like a special effects standpoint, writing standpoint, I do think that there's a way to make religious movies and make them entertaining. This wasn't one of them. Exorcist is a religious movie. William Peter Blatty wrote that to be propaganda to get people into Catholicism, and that ended up being a great movie. It was all bull, but at least you can build off of Christianity for interesting stories as long as you have good direction.
Is The Exorcist a Christian movie though?
It 100% is a Christian movie.
Okay, I guess so.
The mother was an atheist, and then
Right.
by the end of it, she definitely believes because they've given her proof that the devil is real or Captain Howdy is real.
I guess it is because even okay, I think this is fair to say. I don't think this is a hot take at all because even when I was a Christian, I thought this pretty much 95% of Christian movies are just garbage, right?
Yeah.
Like they're just not worth anybody's time. So like when I think of The Exorcist, which is actually like an entertaining film, I don't think of it as a Christian movie, but I guess it kind of is though, huh?
You can have creative people with poor beliefs, and like you get good actors in it, and then you make something happen. The book for Exorcist is amazing. I wasn't as much of a fan of the sequels because he's very much into just releasing propaganda after propaganda about Catholicism, and like eventually all the good ideas are out after you've made The Exorcist, I think.
Yeah, which is funny because I remember Left Behind being controversial because like there are a lot of Catholics that said that the Catholics in that book were left behind and did not get to go to heaven, which is just great when you have these kind of like interfaction conflicts with these things. But real quick, I want to talk about this because we got to get to calls in just a second. But I also want to talk about God's Not Dead. Now, here's the thing. We do not have enough time to talk about God's Not Dead because God's Not Dead, in my opinion, is the epitome. And somebody made fun of me because I say epitome sometimes instead of epitome. But that's just because how I read it. But it's
Isn't it epitome?
It is epitome. I always read that word and I never say it out loud, and I say it as epitome. Okay, so you can sue me. All right, English is bullshit. But look, I think it's the epitome of Christian films. Like if I was to show somebody like what Christian films are, I would show them that one. If only because like it actually has real arguments that people think, like just laid out. Like there's characters in that movie. For those of you who aren't familiar, God's Not Dead is about a character. His name is Joss Whedon.
Yeah, they're not very creative with their names, which is in Christian movies.
Very weird because it has nothing to do with the real life Joss Whedon. But like name Joss Whedon.
Josh Whedon.
Oh, that's right. It's Joss Whedon. Excuse me.
They do lazy changes in it.
You're absolutely right. Okay, it's Josh Whedon. I don't know if there's a connection there. Basically has a standoff with Kevin Sorbo, who is an atheist professor, and this professor is literally making them like sign a document that says like God is not real, and then he spends like the rest of the semester debating this professor about whether God is real or not. And so it's interesting because in most films that are Christian based, I feel like the hackneyed kind of narrative is kind of built into the story itself, but there's not like a lot of like, I don't know, arguments being made because like, why would you? You're watching a movie. But this one, like, because it's the plot is part of the arguments, right? Like they're kind of one and the same. It serves two purposes. One, it's supposed to entertain you, which it's entertaining to me because how ridiculous it is. But it also like is propaganda in and of itself, right? Because it kind of gives that Christian narrative and Christian, point of view.
It gives the straw man that so many Christians like to have about atheists is we do believe, but we just are angry at God. That's what a lot. Right. I hear that call all the time. And Kevin Sorbo eventually admits he hates God because it took his mother away from him.
Right. They literally do the trope in that movie of, well, I'm literally just mad at God because something happened to me in my personal life, which is very interesting. But
I just mentioned I'm an atheist without having any trauma. It's like we do exist.
Yeah, there's a lot wrong with that movie. I didn't see it in theaters when it came out, when I was still a Christian, because I didn't care about Christian movies then. But I remember getting texts from people at the time saying God's not dead, because there's a little thing at the end of the credit. If you don't believe this is a propaganda movie, at the end of this movie, okay, they tell you, send a message to 10 of your friends saying God's not dead, and see who keeps the chain going, you know. And I got a couple of messages from that.
I was wondering if anybody got that, because like I have Christian friends that love that movie, which I find so weird because they like me, but apparently I'm like part of the evil group of atheists, and I'm very open about it in my life. I'm in Southern California, and I think I can get away with it. But they hear all these horrible things about atheists and also Muslims, and that it's very much, if you're not Christian, you're kind of a bad person kind of a movie,
basically.
And I never got one of those texts. None of my friends wanted to save me.
There is some weird Muslim commentary in that movie too, which the movie's full of just weirdness. The freaking duck people are in there. Duck Dynasty people are in there. It's I say, if you have never seen a Christian movie in your life and you're curious about what Christian movies look like, those two movies are good ones to start with. But I'm especially fond with God's Not Dead. That movie is just really just out of its mind. I don't know.
That one, it seemed like somebody watched a Truth Wanted episode and wrote down all the bad Christian arguments. They're like, yeah, these make sense, instead of just like seeing all the fallacies that were brought up to them, because all their arguments are fallacious in it. And even the worst part of it is Kevin Sorbo gets saved because David A.R. White couldn't get his car working for 3 days, and then he ends up hitting Kevin Sorbo with the car when he finally does get it working.
Oh yeah,
because that's God's divine intervention.
I guess spoiler alert now for anybody who hasn't seen it. The atheist character literally gets hit by a car,
but he gets saved. Like Kevin Sorbo's like struggling to breathe, and then David A.R. White is there to preach at him while he's dying, which would be like the worst way to die. But apparently they film that as a good thing. Christians, you find somebody having a heart attack at a restaurant, make sure that you're right on top of them, preaching your Christianity.
They literally, yes, like it sounds like you're making a joke. It sounds like you're making an over exaggeration. They literally just preach at this man who's dying. They do not give him medical attention. It is ridiculous. They're like, oh, he's already gone. It's too late. It's like, how the fuck do you know? Excuse me?
that guy was not a doctor. He was another preacher. He takes a look at him. He's like, oh, he's dead. Like he probably just broke his ribs. Get him, like, call 911. Don't just like preach.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to be those people that talk about movies that you haven't seen, and it's like, well, I don't know what's going on. You have to at least see that movie. I recommend it just for research purposes to see. And I would challenge you, what kind of counter arguments would you make to the character Josh Whedon makes in that movie? Because they're also not great. But unfortunately, we don't really have time to go into them now. We do have to get to some calls. Josh, do you want to talk to some people today? Are you ready?
I love talking to people. Let's do this.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Well, before we do that, we need to give a special thank you to our patron of the week, because every single week we always give a shout out to one person that donates on the Patreon. It's patreon.com/truthwanted or tiny.cc/patreon-tw. We want to thank everybody that gives the show, but we especially want to thank our patron of the week this week. And this week's patron is JP Young. Thank you so much, JP Young, for donating. And again, thank you to everybody who decides to donate. I don't make any money from this. None of the other hosts make money from this. All of the money that goes there goes towards the ACA and making shows like this one even better. So thank you to everybody who decides to donate on there. You guys rock. And with that shout out of the way, are you ready to talk to some folks, Josh?
Still ready. Okay, even 10 seconds later.
Cool. So we're going to talk to Jeff. Jeff's been waiting for a while now before the show. Jeff's calling in from Georgia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing good. Just riffing on some Christian movies on a Good Friday here, and I'm loving it so far. So what's up?
Not bad.
Yeah, I caught that. And Dan, for you not acknowledging the thumbs up on the cross with the wink from Jesus, man, you should be shot. That was funny, Josh. Sorry, but that was funny.
Listen, that caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond. It was a funny joke. I will say. Let me give my official decree right now. Okay, Josh, that was a good joke. Okay, there we go. It has been acknowledged.
So, anyway, and I'm right there with. Yeah, so I'm right there with Josh. I have caught every single episode of
Hell
Truth
yeah.
Wanted,
Oh my
and
God.
I've also caught it the weekend that it aired. So I didn't always catch it
Oh my
Friday
God.
night, but I always caught it that weekend. So I guess you could say I'm the epitome. How do you say it? The
The epitome. All right,
the
listen.
epitome of the good listener.
Here's I guess there's going to be a new Truth Wanted dictionary that's going to come out, and the first word that's going to be in it, we're going to skip A through D, and we're just going straight to E. Epitome. All right, epitome. That is the word. Word of the week is
Sounds
epitome.
good.
All right. Here's Dan's dictionary lessons
Epitome,
for you.
got it.
Anyway, Jeff, I thank you. I'll be honest. I'm shocked and surprised. I guess I'm always weirded out when I'm like, oh, you guys listen to me? That's crazy. But also, like, from the very beginning, that was like 3 years ago now. You rock. Josh, you've been rocking and helping out the community. Thank you to everybody who's been supporting the show for that long. You guys are cool. You should definitely like come talk to me in the after show sometime. That would be great. But anyway, Jeff, what do you want to call in about?
Well, recently I've bumped into a few, fellow skeptics, or at least they're in a skeptics group with me, and yet they don't employ a lot of skepticism with certain beliefs. And I've noticed, that they will, use the same sort of stuff that we hear from, religious believers. Oh, you're just angry, you're not open-minded. And I've noticed that they get mad, and I just don't understand. They're the ones claiming that we're the angry atheists, but I think most of us just seem to get angry when, people will make claims, and then when you want to challenge them.
Sure.
So recently I've had a buddy just, tell me about UFOs. And I was wondering if you guys knew any good sources on those that have really looked into the claims. I haven't found anything really good yet.
What do you mean by good sources of people who have like investigated UFO claims?
UFO claims from a skeptic's point of view. So I've bumped into like some of Michael Shermer's stuff, but he's not really a UFO specialist. I was hoping maybe one of you guys had looked at some of that stuff.
Oh man, so there's like a couple of different people on YouTube I know who do a good job on that stuff. I'm not in the business of endorsing people and stuff and telling you that, but I would say like the problem with UFO stuff, right, is like with Christianity or religious claims, if there's an orthodoxy, somebody has written a book about it. Somebody has written stuff where you can kind of take quotes and figure it all out. With the UFO stuff, there's a lot of like eyewitness testimony. So you have to like grab that stuff, or you're looking at second or sometimes third hand sources from people who are writing that stuff down. And there's not a lot you can go on unless you're kind of there for a lot of the stuff if you're talking about specific events. So it's a bit harder. There are some skeptic people out there, but there's definitely not as many as there are for like the atheist community, because like we can just look at the Bible. Like we can just kind of use that as our baseline, and then everything else kind of follows. But like UFO stuff, there's different people. There's people who believe in UFOs for different reasons, right? Because there's different events, and even people in the UFO communities will be like, "Oh yeah, that event was bullshit, but this one was totally real." So it's a little harder to kind of figure that stuff out. I think that's why you don't see as many people.
Like you can find videos that will like and I can't remember any channels right now because I wasn't prepared for this off the top of my head. But you can search online and see people that found like expertise in like CGI and like digital video, and they're able to debunk a lot of the so-called UFO footage that you find, because a lot of people say I have no explanation for what this is, and then they'll go UFO, but you not having an explanation makes it only a UFO for you. That doesn't mean that somebody else out there doesn't have an explanation for what that object is. And lots of times it's just a defect in the camera that people don't understand.
For CG stuff, there's great. Like I think Freddie Wong used to do that stuff, and Captain Disillusion is my favorite there. So I can tell you some folks off the top of my head that do that kind of stuff. For the other kind of stuff, I don't think you need other people to debunk it for you. To be honest with you, I think a lot of the stuff you can kind of figure out for yourself. It's a very sensationalized industry too, of people trying to get that stuff out there. But,
yeah, if they're doing like argument from incredulity and they don't understand what the object can be, you can already dismiss it unless they can verify exactly what the object is with some hard evidence. They're kind of going into the weeds with it, and I dismiss that pretty much right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right. Have y'all heard of this new streaming service? I think it's called Gaia.
Yes. Oh God, I'm very familiar with Gaia.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about it on here before, but for those who aren't aware, Gaia is basically the Netflix for your new age friend that lives down the street that's really into essential oils and crystal healing. Like that, Gaia is like the absolute worst parts of humanity and humanity's beliefs on things put together into like multiple, like, hey, want to watch ancient alien streams and then talk about how like I don't know how you can align your chakras if you eat the right vegetables. Like this is the place for you. They really got that market like down pat. It's incredible.
I still don't even know why chakras need to be aligned, let alone what they are.
Well, you got to pay somebody for it, right?
Right. But yeah, that was the evidence that my atheist buddy gave me. He sent me to this program on Gaia, and it was one guy, Stephen Greer. I don't know if you guys know about him. He's apparently a UFO specialist, but it was just claim after claim after claim, and there was no evidence whatsoever. And when I point out, that it was just claims, then I just get blasted. I think I might have lost a buddy over this just for being a skeptic. So I don't know. It's just frustrating. I was just wondering if you guys have, bumped into that where, just being a skeptic, amongst, fellow skeptics.
The thing is,
when people get so entrenched into their beliefs, they're going to take it personally. You gotta understand, you're not going to convince them right away that they're going to say, "Oh, you're right. There was bad reasoning in this UFO video." I agree with you. That's never going to happen. When things are getting heated, I suggest changing the subject. So maybe if it's a friendship that's important to you, change the subject. Maybe come back to it at a later date. But just drop those subtle those digs into it, and it could end up coming back if they're constantly finding the same points being made up against them. So you're definitely laying breadcrumbs to better skepticism, but you're never going to convince them in one conversation or even like 20 conversations.
Mm-hmm. The thing about being in a community like we are, Jeff, is that most people I talk to agree on is that like Christianity and other religions like probably aren't true. And that's the most that we'll agree on with anything. I've been in this place for too long and I've talked to too many people and realized, God, there is such a diversity in beliefs when it comes to political opinions, when it comes to opinions on historical events and historical narratives. I mean, that stuff can go all day. And, there's other communities that may unite around that, but we're in a weird spot because not only are we a minority, at least in the United States, as far as what our beliefs are, but also like the way that we got here isn't necessarily unified. Most people are Christians in this country because they grew up as Christians. Like that's just a hard fact. A lot of us either, there are some of us that always kind of grew up not believing, but most of us had to go on journeys to get to where we are. And so we've had to pick up a lot of those skills and figure out how to do that to get here. And not all of us have fully developed those skills to get over here. That's just the fact of it. We may have dropped one belief, but we haven't dropped everything else. I'll give you a great example. I think I figured out like that, hey, maybe I shouldn't treat gay people the way that I was treating them or talking about them before I figured out that Christianity was kind of, not real, right? Like, there's domino effects that happens with people sometimes, but not everybody is on the same chain of dominoes, so it sucks. But yeah, like exactly what Josh is saying, it's easy to get emotionally defensive about some of these positions, especially ones that we've held for our entire lives. And
not everybody learns skepticism or critical thinking. Like there was a time when I fully believed in ghosts and stuff like that. I never was religious, but I still had like ghost beliefs and stuff like that. I actually went to therapy because I used to see shadow people as a kid. And then you get older and you realize that your thought process is you learn about skepticism. I learned a lot about it from the ACA as a starting point, and then that brought me out of like looking into my weird beliefs in a different way. So like it doesn't happen overnight. I didn't like listen to one episode and go, I don't believe in ghosts anymore. It took a while. So you just got to keep reinforcing that. And hopefully if they're a good friend of yours, they'll stick around even if you had a fight. Otherwise, if they're getting that angry over a UFO thing, then maybe they're a friend worth losing.
Yeah. Now, Jeff, let me give you some specific insight
Yeah.
because you're like, hey, who are some people that know about some of this stuff? You're talking to me, bud. So let me help you out, Jeff. Okay. Let me tell you about Stephen Greer. Okay. Let's go back a bit. All right. So a lot of people don't realize this, but there is a microcosm and a micro industry, if you will, specifically in the US, but broadly internationally with the UFO world. And what I mean by that is there are conferences that are organized. There are groups that are organized. There are people that like run lots of events and put out lots of this kind of content out there that just isn't really seen by mainstream audiences because no mainstream publisher would ever put any of this stuff out. That is another thing about Gaia and why you see so many documentaries on there, because it's cheaper to license that stuff than it is to get like real films and real documentaries. Because a lot of those people are crowdfunding that shit. Okay. Stephen Greer is one of those people who talks about how he alleged, I believe his story, I could be wrong, I could be mixing him up. I believe his story is he used to work for the US government and is one of those people that claims, oh, the US government has classified, alien technology, and other corporations and international bodies do as well. And he's made a career off of this, right? He's had interviews done with him.
Sure.
He was on fucking Larry King. Okay. Like he's one of the big boys.
Really?
Yeah. Stephen Greer has made a whole career out of this. Nothing he has ever said, I think, has ever been verified by anyone ever. I don't know if anyone has ever said, yeah, oh, I used to work with Steven. Oh, Stevie boy. He used to be co-work. I don't think if that's ever happened. I don't think any of the technology he's talked about has ever been produced. I think he's just tells stories. And again, this is just me kind of talking off the cuff about Stephen Greer because he is one of many people who kind of does this thing where their street cred, and why they get cred in these communities is, yeah, I used to be one of the other guys, and now I'm turning heel and invite me to your conferences to speak and talk about these things. So he's one of those dudes. So yeah, I would like encourage, I mean, maybe his Wikipedia article talks about him more and stuff, but there are some people who have written about the man in his career. But honestly, he's all talk. He's one of those people that has all talk and has nothing to show for it, just like pretty much everybody in those communities. So there you go, Jeff. That if you want to low down, that's why I
was floored when this was what he gave me was this guy with just, I mean, the very first thing he started off with was his near-death experience. I'm like, oh, here we go. And then it just grew from there. But I'll let you guys go. Appreciate it. And Dan, I caught both of your YouTube videos with Anthony Magnabosco. So glad you're on our team now.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And I realize the irony of that too, by somebody who also publicly professed as a Christian and is now not, and talks about other things too.
No, Dan's a con man.
I've never made money off of this. At least not yet. And like I was just a college kid on campus when I said all that stuff. And yeah, I was a part of a Christian organization, but man, I wasn't like running the Christian circuit or anything. I don't know. I just want to help people. That's all. But it is interesting to see like how these people kind of find their niches in these circles, right?
I mean, even I was referencing back to when I wasn't a skeptic. Everybody kind of pulls cred from coming from the other crowd, even if they're not even thinking about it.
Sure. And like, I didn't go to like theology school or anything, like I was a young man at the time. So I consider myself just like anybody else, just kind of figured out, hey, this was not working. But
yeah, and I didn't go to ghost school either. So we're on the same footing.
There you go. So yeah, weird stuff. We should talk more about Guy on this show, honestly, but there's so much garbage on there. It's really bad.
I'm almost tempted to check it out just by your description of it. If it has a free trial, I'll check it out.
My personal friend, a genetically modified skeptic, did a video on Gaia. I think I'm featured in there because he made a joke about there's somebody talking about white giants, and then he showed a picture of me, and I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah,
that's pretty damn fun.
It's pretty good. So yeah, look if you want to like blast your brain, go look up some stuff from Gaia, because that shit is absolutely buck wild. But I want to move on to another caller here. Before I do that, I just want to remind folks that, hey, this show is produced by the Atheist Community of Austin, which is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. And there's a couple different ways you can help support the show by doing it. One of those is by directly donating. If you hit that donate button, if you're watching this on YouTube, that money directly goes to the ACA, doesn't get taken by YouTube or anybody else. So that's one really great way to support the show. I definitely recommend people do that if you are interested in that. So with that, I want to go ahead and move on. We got some interesting calls here. I want to talk to David. David, who's calling in from Florida. David, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey guys, thanks for taking my phone call. I just was interested in seeing what your opinion was. There's like it was in the news a few days ago that Canada is considering putting into like a law that questioning, condoning, denying, or even downplaying the Holocaust, they're trying to make that illegal. And I thought the downplaying part is kind of Orwellian to me, but I kind of wanted to get your guys' opinion as to, how that, whether you think that law is makes sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a free speech thing. I don't know. I mean, like, I know Germany has already done this for quite a number of years now, where if any public displays of like Nazi symbols and things like that are actually illegal, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean,
I don't know.
I'd only be worried if it was like in the schools or like government officials in Canada were like downplaying it. If it's just like random people on the streets, I really don't care if they have a bad view on history. Like people are allowed to say dumb things. So I'd have to look at the law and see exactly where they're specifying where they can downplay it or deny the Holocaust. But I do believe in free speech, and as long as they're not like harming people with it, they're definitely like mentally harming people that have gone through stuff. I have a Jewish side of the family, so I have family members that are very sensitive on this subject. But I still think people are allowed to have their own dumb opinions about horrible things that happen.
Yeah, this is an issue I go back and forth on because I think for most of my life, I've always been somebody that said, yeah, like free speech, we shouldn't mess with that. We shouldn't have government intervention for what people say in a public place. That's fine. And then there's like, well, there are some exceptions though, right? Like you can't say fire in a movie theater and stuff like that. It's like, okay, so there's some safety issues there. And then I have to wonder, after the past couple of years of living in this country and seeing an objective rise of white supremacism, rise of Nazism, and rise of just hate groups in general. Like that's not me saying it. That's like stats that's been publicly posted by like the FBI and like other organizations that look for that stuff. And I'm like, it does make me pause. Like I'm not full on saying yeah we should absolutely ban, but I'm like, that is kind of a problem though. And I wonder what's the best way to deal with that. Well, and I understand why somebody might think that might be a potential solution.
You couldn't platform it. Like I wouldn't want them going on TV and platforming these types of people. But if they're not on government ground, I think they should be fined as hell if they're if they're doing it on TV and just getting misinformation out there. I can get behind that. But if they're like in an assembly on a non-government ground and they want to say dumb stuff, fine, but I don't think that's really putting their word out for the majority of the people.
I think maybe like fining people for. Oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to interject one thing. Like to me, it's like it's a belief, and it's basically saying you can't have that belief. You can't have a belief. You can't even entertain that. I guess publicly, I think it is. They said it's not illegal privately, I think, but like publicly stating anything. So, I mean, it's just very, that's pretty Orwellian to me. But I appreciate you guys' thoughts on it.
Yeah, I do think that there's a difference between. We've learned in the past couple of years just how much bad information can hurt people. And the beliefs don't exist in a vacuum, and just like putting out information for people that don't know how to vet it right, that's wrong. It could start out as denying the Holocaust and then move into like more horrible white supremacist stuff. So like I really I do hesitate to platform anything like that in any like big public arena. Especially like schools or anything like that.
Yeah, but like one comparison I would make would be like, how people in the Bible, people who believe in the Bible, often they get compared to hating on homosexuality or maybe a number of other things. And at what point then does that belief all of a sudden become hate speech? And why wouldn't that be hate speech?
It's true. It's true. I wonder if something, because like, let's talk about this show, right? This show is critical of a lot of people's beliefs and stances. And you could easily put something in the legislation that says we would be considered hate speech on some level because of criticisms that we have, where I know we aren't trying to hate on people, but like we would qualify under that for if it was flipped the other way, right? So it's almost like, how do you make something that works universally?
There is definitely some gray area. Yeah,
it's really hard. Like I'm not an expert on statecraft. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if like I don't know if there's something specific you can point to, like if somebody has a swastika or something, it's like, hey, you have a fine if you put a swastika up. I mean, maybe that works, but it's difficult, right? I don't know what the best solution is there.
It's definitely something I'd want to read what it actually says, and before I can give like a fully formed opinion on exactly what this law is.
I also think about like, and obviously corporations don't qualify for this, but I think of websites like 4chan where like there's like barely any moderation, and that place is full of awfulness. Whereas Facebook is honestly not much better. It's just more people, so you don't see it as much. But like, I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what to make of this one, David.
Area with all free speech, like, and I'm constantly going back and forth on my. So even what I've said like 30 seconds ago is not in concrete. It's definitely there's a wiggle room because I don't think anybody has a perfect solution to this. So there's always going to be people coming from both sides with good points and bad points.
David, you're not the first person to ask me a question like this, like in a similar vein. And I've still yet to find a good answer because again, I'm
with you.
Go ahead. I mean, I'm someone who has a microphone, who's talking out right now, again, who's being critical of people. And like, how do I live in a society that's going to justly apply to me and not to people like, I don't know, a Klansman or something, right? Or not. Well, it justly applies to them, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like the consequences for speech that actually causes violence and harm, because I do think speech does.
What speech? But guys, what speech causes violence or harm? Like that's me. I can't get behind that. I'm pretty black and white on this, and that if the minute you go down that slippery slope of saying, hey, there's somebody who's going to decide what my beliefs can be. Boy, at that point, you better watch out.
It's not about what your beliefs can be, though. It's whether you can have your beliefs platformed. Because even you said that, like, privately they're allowed to do it as long as they're not doing it on like government buildings or the airways that are paid for and they can be fined for even swearing on it. They're allowed on the internet. You can say any dumb thing you want on the internet. I'm speaking right now.
Yeah.
But David, like you said, in like you had mentioned it's like in 13 other countries, like it's like basically any public, like if you go out on the street, and I think maybe it applies in Germany, like if you're just on a public street and you bring this stuff up, I'm pretty sure like you can come under fire for that and be arrested at this point. And like there's an old lady, I'm sure you heard about her. She spent a few years in jail, and it's just, I understand that how ugly that people perceive that other people's beliefs to be, right? But who's causing, if they're not openly saying,
let me tell you who's causing it, David. I'll give you an example. Okay. Yeah. Right now we have a situation in Ukraine, and Russian media outlets are telling false news stories about the denazification of Ukraine. Right. And these news stories are coming out of Russian outlets. And because of this, people are enlisting to go help out for this cause, right? So there's a direct cause right there. False information is informing people's beliefs and informs people's ideologies, right?
Yeah, let me ask you a quick question regarding what you just said.
Yeah.
People accuse like Russia of propaganda. Do you believe that the United States performs any propaganda against it.
David, the United States is full of propaganda. It's not the same though, because we do have laws as far as news corporate world, for example, where you can't publicly slander somebody on the news without having evidence to back it up. You can go to court over that, right? So like we do have litigation.
My point,
there are consequences for your speech. But yeah, does the government lie? Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll agree with you there. That's
my point though is that how can we be so sure that we're not being double propagandized about what Russia is like? It's very difficult to trust any information at this point. And who's to say that Russia really is doing what they're saying they're doing? Is it possible that that's propaganda or no?
So again, when it comes to very wide scale things, I mean, you can talk about the probabilities argument, but really when it comes to news, like I don't think a lot of people realize the news industry does have standards. I think people forget that because they see the tabloid stuff and they're like, oh, you can just say anything. There are legal ramifications for what people publish and for what gets put out there. So like, like I just read a New York Times article today that was talking about how Russian media outlets are specifically parroting points from Fox News. Fox News has like quadrupled in viewership in Russia because like a lot of the points that they're putting out there, they think is like the common everyday American citizens view of what's happening in situations there, right? So like these organizations, yes, are they huge conglomerates? Yes, but they're also separate in some ways. Like there are unified news bodies that talk about like what's happening. If you've ever read anything and it says information comes from the AP report, right? The AP is a news organization where other news people get their stuff. So, there's different separate bodies that exist, differently, separately from bodies of government and even other bodies of news sources and stuff like that can just be, I think, shown with enough evidence to be true. So what are you going to trust more? Well, you have to look at where are these news people getting their sources from? And if you look at American news outlets, specifically ones that are much more trusted, they're going to say, we had our team go to this place and talk to this person, or we got this report from this government and stuff. Whereas places that want to push that narrative are going to like have a questionable headline and then kind of publish kind of more of a fluff piece about what's going on and get people's comments on the situation. So like the denazification narrative that's going on, they're just taking quotes from what like Putin is saying. They're not taking any demographic data from Ukraine. They're if they show footage, it's going to be like from one or two places of like Nazis, because Nazis like live everywhere, right? It's not going to be the same quality of evidence that's going to be presented. I think that's a key thing when distinguishing what's real and what's not real when it comes to stuff. So there's my long answer to that, David.
No, that's cool. I appreciate your thoughts, man.
Okay, well, I appreciate you calling in too, David, and thanks so much for the ring. It is an important topic of conversation that runs directly into the themes of Truth Wanted, which is we want to know true things, and how do we do that? And that kind of mentality of, well, what if the people we trust is actually not the things we trust? I mean, yeah, that can happen, but you still have to look at the body of evidence. Right?
Yeah, and usually if you're looking at this, I hang out on Our Conspiracy on Reddit all the time just because they're definitely buying up the Russian propaganda over there. And you look at their sources, a lot of times it's just a headline that's completely misleading. Then you read the article and you just see how much of a fluff piece it is and how weak their evidence is for it. Where everywhere else in the world, well, not everywhere else in the world because that place exists, but if you look elsewhere, you can find good evidence that Russia is a propaganda piece or releasing propaganda to their people. And then they're getting away with like Tucker Carlson constantly giving poor information because he's been designated an opinion entertainment.
This is another thing too. A lot of people don't realize when folks like Tucker Carlson are on, it's not news anymore. It's an opinion show. And they make that very, very clear. A lot of people can't distinguish between the opinion section of a newspaper and the news section of a newspaper because they'll put them real close together. Or if it's a particular piece that has like a slant, they're going to make that more ambiguous.
Yeah, so there definitely is propaganda, but you got to read how much of it is facts and how much of it is just, like you said, the fluff piece. And the information for the Ukrainian Nazi garbage that they're putting out there is terrible.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to, if folks at home, you want an experiment at home, you want to try to figure this out, you want to build your skills, go to a website that pretty much, well, I guess I can't say everybody because there are people that follow, but let's go to a website that has problems, historically has had problems. Like, and when I say historically has problems, I mean has gone to court over a lot of their problems. Look at Breitbart News. Okay. So I would say start with that, go to the front page there, see what things they're saying, compare that to one that has more liberal leanings, Washington Post, and compare those two stories on whatever piece they're talking about and start digging for yourself. See what some of those differences are and look at the quality of information. Because Breitbart will literally quote blogs sometimes. I've seen it. It's ridiculous, right? People who are non-experts on stuff are always going to, and sometimes that's another genre of piece too, right? People who claim to be experts on something, they interview somebody and they say, expert says blah blah blah, or
Oh yeah, you gotta look into the credentials a lot of the time, especially in these conspiracy corners that are going into, because like with some, I'm not gonna go into who I'm talking about, but I've seen them like platforming horrible so-called doctors, and you look into it and these doctors have been discredited a long time ago, and you look at the kind of studies that they were doing and they're terrible studies, and there's a reason for why they've been disqualified. So like you definitely got to be like, if you don't know these people, see what their expertise is and see if they're actually qualified to be given the opinions that they're giving.
Yeah, and also remember, like the function of a news outlet is to collect statements, is to collect objective facts that they can. It is not necessary. I mean, yes, there's an opinion section, but when it comes to news section, they're legally obligated to do that. There are consequences, and they go to court cases all the time over stuff that people have tried to sue over or not true, and they want to mitigate that as much as possible. Like, unfortunately, capitalism is like trying to also keep it true, but also they push those boundaries as much as possible too, right? Because they want to try to reach those broader audiences of people who,
we have like people in government that are looking for like quotes that can be mined for these types of newspapers. Like Lauren Boebert, she says something stupid, and now suddenly that can be a headline, and then you can have an article that it's factual, but they have a quote that matches their agenda, and so many people are just reading the headlines now.
There is a skill. If you know how everybody is like, oh, if you could like take out a class and put something in, what would you do? I would put it in for journalism. Anybody who's taken, I originally I took classes in journalism and communication in college and stuff, and it was fascinating to me, these skills that I would say the skills I learned in there probably helped me become the person that I am today when it comes to skeptical reading and figuring out how to do good research and stuff like that. Because it is really amazing what real journalists are doing. I know journalists get a lot of flack these days. It's very it's a common thing to kind of hate on it, but like it's a hard career to do if you're doing it well. It really is, because sometimes you're just putting out the facts and people are just really not.
Yeah, and you've definitely shown in the past few years that we need to have students coming up into the world understanding what real news is. I took art class. I painted okay, but I think I could have used that time better for learning how to dissect through journalism and stuff like that. That should be like critical curriculum for everybody to take on.
That's opinion, though. This isn't news. This is opinion.
But anyway. But you can quote mine that and put it at the top of the article. Josh Entner says that we need to have these classes.
Josh Entner, a movie podcast producer, says that we need classes on journalism. Right? More at 8.
Don't Google my credentials there.
It's great. Well, before we move on to the next call, I want to talk about another way you can support the show real quick. You may notice I like to wear hoodies. And if you want to get a Truth Wanted brand hoodie, there's a way to do it. You can go to our merch store. We have a new website where we're getting merch, but it's the same link. If you go to tiny.cc/merchaca, and look, we got some shirts. We got some other stuff you can get. I have proposed some designs as well to put in the store. So hopefully those will come in there soon. We'll see. But yeah, if you want to represent the show, want to talk about, hey, I've been listening to Truth Wanted since day one.
I'll always keep wanting that shirt because that looks pretty awesome.
That's what I'm saying, right? That's what I'm saying. So anyway, that's another way to support the show if you guys are interested in that. But for now, I'm going to talk to Jay, because Jay had a bit of a follow-up on our last conversation here. So I think it's a good segue. Jay, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey, what's up? How you doing, Dan? Forgot the co-host name. Good to see you.
This is
I
Josh
kind of wanted to
Entner.
follow Josh. Oh, geez, thanks, Josh. All right, so I just wanted to follow up based on what the last call was talking about, in terms of the proposed ban that Canada is supposed to have in terms of Holocaust denial. I think what a lot of people don't really recognize in terms of how the U.S. does news is that there's a lot of opinion that is layered into that. Like you were talking about Tucker Carlson, that's entirely opinion, right? That's just him giving his opinion on things. That's not actually the news. We do need to be careful in regards to what speech we allow, because certain speech will highlight certain things about people, and it's kind of propaganda, not in the propaganda in the true sense, as in it will cause you to dislike a specific set of people, in a sense as in you'll blame them for a certain thing. So I really think that we should be cautious when we think about things about Holocaust denial. It should be something that we shouldn't allow, just as we don't allow someone to scream fire in a crowded theater.
Yeah, I think people there's two things I think about, because one of those things is if you sanction something as protected by law, immediately people begin to question it. Okay, so like look at what happened with COVID when vaccine hesitancy has always kind of been the thing. It has quadrupled, if not more so, because of how we're getting a little bit of mic interference there on your end, Jay. So if you could fix that for us, I think that'd be great. I'm going to go ahead and mute you down until we can do that. But when the vaccines first coming out, right, and people were talking about the hype behind them, so many people were hesitant about it just because of how many people were saying, "Oh, this is a totally safe thing to do." The same people who were getting vaccines since they were children, in order for them to go to public schools, are now worried about it because so many people are talking about how legit it is. Like the human brains are just kind of stupid sometimes. And we're just like, oh, well, now I'm kind of suspicious because everybody's talking about how cool this thing is. And like, that's what I think about when I think about the Holocaust denial stuff, because as soon as you enshrine that into law, I almost guarantee you there will be more people who will become Holocaust denialists and skeptics when that happens. Now, that's not the best reason to say why you shouldn't do that, but that's a concern I have. And the other concern is, we have to figure out which speech actually causes harm. Because if we're going to make a law that says, like, hey, we can't have this kind of speech anymore, we better be pretty damn specific about what we're saying, because you can interpret that in ways that may not be great for anybody. Like when we talk about like slander laws, okay, there's damages that happen there, and you can point to objective facts about what happened and what doesn't happen. Holocaust, that's a historical event that has happened, and yes, there are living survivors of that, but it's mostly affecting the people who are descendants of the Jewish faith, but also of the Jewish race, and just the their livelihood that's being harmed there as well. Because if you start to believe, oh, these people are part of this shadowy organization and they're all of a specific race, suddenly like you develop this prejudice there, and that's just harder to demonstrate.
Yeah, you don't hear people screaming the Holocaust never happened in a crowded room and people getting trampled. So like you don't get direct harm. So it's definitely like, well, this is one of
there are rallies and stuff that happen. I mean, like there are people that make decisions in their private time that do affect people, right?
Yeah,
like,
but you can't see it like directly, like the shouting fire thing.
It's
that's
harder
what I'm
to
talking
demonstrate.
About. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like there is harm for people, and it does promote a bad way of thinking. So that's why I keep going back and forth on the idea on this, on whether it's a good idea, because there's definitely harm to a community, and it does promote like the white supremacy ideals of like taking away, because we see the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis out there right now, and they're trying to make themselves look better by making this something that's false. So it does promote harmful propaganda, but is it enough where we can take it away as there's free speech?
Well, can you litigate it? That's what I want to know, right? Because if you can't litigate it, then it doesn't matter. Right, like the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening. That's another example. Like I was out there on the streets marching with other people, but that whole year, like when that was really picking up, like I heard all kinds of people saying, "Yeah, I don't know about this whole Black Lives Matter thing, and then suddenly like people became skeptical of it again. It's like how do you demonstrate legitimacy? Can you demonstrate legitimacy without enshrining it to law? Do we have to enshrine something into law in order for it to like be the best solution for how our society gets along? I don't know. What I do know is there's been more harm than ever caused from free speech because of the open platforms that we have now, and just I don't have to talk about the history of Facebook and how that has contributed to the number of hate groups in this country growing. I think everybody who watches the show is probably familiar with that. So how do we deal with that? I don't know. I guess that's what I have to say at the end of the day. I'm gonna unmute you now, Jay. I hope we got your audio issues fixed. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I hope I fixed my audio issue. Sorry about that. But yeah, I do think we do need some regulations in regards to what can be said, because these are topics that will fuel hope some people view a certain sect of people, and it can cause them to have certain beliefs that they will act on because our beliefs inform how we act. So it is kind of a touchy thing, which I do agree. I don't think we need to maybe ban it completely, but maybe we could look at what Germany did, seeing that they are the progenitor of where this kind of came from. So maybe we could look at how Germany addressed the issue, which, mind you, Germany teaches about the Holocaust straight across the board in all their classes and stuff. And I think maybe that approach will have people looking at things differently, right? And then that will kind of help us to say, okay, we can't talk about this topic, but we can talk about this topic, and we need to ensure we frame it correctly. Because what happens a lot of times is people frame it a certain way, and then a different message gets displayed.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, Jay. You, as a man who lives in Texas, right? You don't have to drive very far to see people like waving Confederate flags and stuff everywhere, right? And like that's displaying of an ideology, but it's also some people's just way of saying fuck you. Like they really just don't like being told what to do. They don't like that this is a controversial thing, and they just want to put it out there.
Yeah.
So are they going to have to face the same consequences as somebody that has like a swastika out? Like I don't know. It's a hard issue. It's a hard issue to process, and man, I am not an expert on it. I'm really glad you guys can see that. But yeah, I'm not the one that's going to be making the judgment call here at the end of the day. But I'm glad that we discussed some things, because as people who are, again, of a minority group, in that we are atheists, right? And that we are, the law has always been skewed against atheists. We can see how it might not play things in our favor, right? And how people can use that against us as a group. And so I can relate to that and see how that can affect other groups as well that I'm not a part of and have been very clearly disenfranchised and very clearly the victims of violence, which I have not been. And I don't think most atheists in the United States are, although it does happen. So very crazy.
And as a Black immigrant in the South, I echo your concerns there, because I do see it. So
yeah, I'm sure you see it in Florida too, Jay.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't. I
That's
do
the
not
most
doubt that for a second.
state.
Yeah, we have our own little issues here.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling in and giving your follow-up thoughts, because it's definitely a topic that deserves a pretty long conversation.
Yes, it's not a black and white issue at all.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
Exactly.
Jay, thanks so much for calling into the show.
All right.
Appreciate your thoughts. Any follow-up on that, Josh? I know I talked a lot there.
No, you were doing it pretty good. I still think education is the best way to combat this kind of thing. I do think we need, like we were talking about earlier, Josh's school programs for teaching about how to read journalism and how to get into journalism. I think that's the best way to combat this.
Yeah, I used to be hopeful in that, but like, how many people have done absolutely fine in the public school system and have actually turned out to be total jerks? Right.
That's why I think education is the only way we can fix it. But the education system needs to be changed. Like a lot of what was going on, what they were asking for during those Black Lives Matter protests, which would have like put money back into schools instead of just into the police department, put it into like money that could raise up neighborhoods. That's a way of combating this misinformation too.
Yeah. I mean, Josh, I live in a state that like has it in the history books that Moses was a real person and like wrote, parts of the Old Testament and stuff like that. That's in some curriculum.
Does your state believe in the magical stuff too? Like he pushed the water aside, or
I
or
saw
did
the
they?
page that they wrote out. They didn't talk about all that. I think they did say he wrote the Pentateuch and stuff, which is kind of crazy, and also talking about its importance in Western morality. So that's fun. It's
I
very
worry
cool.
about some of the school books I hear. I any state that's even like trying to push creationism in and stuff like that just like scares me.
Yeah, yeah. We just don't have a lot of great policies for the information age. We weren't ready. Humanity was not
No.
ready for the internet.
There
That's my
was like
takeaway.
an initial push of like people finding good information, but it was because it was the computer savvy people that were first getting on the internet. And now it's accessible to your grandmother who maybe doesn't know how to discern information very well.
Yeah, yeah. I have no more thoughts on that. It just makes me sad. I think we should move on to some other callers. Before I move on to next one though, we should definitely talk about some of the other shows that we have here at the ACA, which you have also seen, Josh. I think you've seen all of those too, right?
Most of them.
Most of them at least, right? So we're going to show a quick promo. Check this out.
If you can get someone to acknowledge that there's a person suffering from gender dysphoria, and the way to alleviate that dysphoria is with a particular treatment, then they then have to justify why we shouldn't be applying that treatment. It's if we teach kids about sex ed, then we also have to send them to war.
Right. I don't think that makes sense though.
Shocker.
Like this is a story that like is flagrantly right out in the open fake. Like some religions, like you can get some wiggle room on it, but this Joseph Smith, we know he made this up. He's up there with L. Ron Hubbard in absurdities.
The creation of suffering. No, mate, I'll mute you if you're going to try and talk. I was obviously not done. I'm not finished talking.
Are you done?
Oh, no, not Philly. I'm going to click the little mute button if you're going to start getting all grumpy.
The ultimate foundation of morality, which I would describe as well-being, is a subjective foundation. But once you have a foundation,
you've had this conversation for decades about morality and continue to repeat the same things. But when
because I'm right.
And we're back. And just in case you didn't get to see it, you should definitely check out some of the other shows that we have here at the Atheist Community of Austin. And you can do that by going to the AEN Podcast Network. We got a channel on YouTube and also other places where you can listen to it on audio only. It's pretty cool. So definitely look at that if you have not already. And with that out of the way, folks, yeah, I wish I could say, yeah, we've got lots of callers who want to talk to us and who are ready to go. But there's just one caller here right now who wants to talk to us. It's an old favorite, a household name. It's Biblically, who's calling in from, I don't know where Biblically's from. Biblically doesn't want to tell us where he's from. That's totally fine. Biblically's calling
he's
in
from Earth.
He's from Earth.
Somewhere on Earth.
I think we could say, I think we can say that much.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But biblically, you're alive again on Truth Wanted. What's going on tonight?
Biblically, I'm calling from God. So God is literally next to me as I'm speaking with you. So what I want to talk about is Genesis 1:1. That in the beginning,
maybe you
God
should ask
created the
God
heavens
what
and
a
the
good
earth.
argument for us would be, because if you got him standing right next to you, you can win this debate.
That's true. Can we talk to him if he's there?
Well, that's what I was going to talk about is Genesis 1:1.
Well, that's in a book, though. You have God right
We're
next to you.
That's not, yeah, you said that's what we're going to talk about, but that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about how you said God is literally next to you. What does that mean?
Well, Genesis 1:1 comports with sacred theology. So that's both the Bible and the knowledge of God at the same
But
time.
that's not what I asked, though.
So
I want to know, what does it mean when you say God is literally next to you?
that God interacts with me. Our God of the Bible interacts with me throughout the day. So he gives me...
way? Yeah, what does that look like?
Well, he responds to my queries. He gives me warm, tingly feelings inside. He moves stars for me outside, objects in my room. Hence
Like
my
you actually see
username.
objects getting picked up by God. Like he could pick up like a pencil near you and move it around your room. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, stuff like that. So my username, so this should give you an understanding on the relationship I have with our God, is that my username is biblically God's perfect inamarato. So in other words, God's perfect male lover. So I have a YouTube channel with that username, biblically God's perfect inamarato. So I've chosen to live a perfect life in accordance to our Heavenly Father of the Bible. In return, I'll be rewarded in accordance to his ultimacy in his new kingdom of everlasting paradise. You too can have this life if you choose to live perfect. This comports with Matthew. Be perfect like our Heavenly Father is.
I don't think I can live perfectly, and I don't know if I'd want to, but taking all that aside, I want to talk about what you just said, which was you think that there are things that happen in a room that you can see and that are also moving, and that helps contribute to your belief in God. Have you ever decided to record any of those events?
Biblically, you already know God exists, so I don't need to record.
I don't.
No, that's not true at all.
And I've said it every time you've told me that. I don't know that he exists. I do know that other things exist, and I do know that if they moved without any force of nature or human interaction, that
or
would
like
be
checking
something
to see if the
about.
window is open or something.
Yeah, like.
But like dictionarily, I don't believe in a God. You need to come up with actual things to back it up. So like you should we have the I'm a mod on the Facebook fan group. If you can take video of God moving things around, I will be happy to share that with all the other hosts on here.
Biblically, only our God meets the requirements to be eternal because he is ultimate, and the universe was created because matter is three-dimensional, so it's contingent on parts. So in other words, it's irreducibly complex.
You kind of ignored everything I said. I asked if you'd be willing to share video in the Facebook fan group, which I'm an admin on, and I will happily share it with them. Address that before you go on to your next claim, please.
Again, I've already stated that everyone knows God exists.
You've asserted that everybody knows there's God, but dictionarily, I don't believe in a God, so that doesn't match up with reality.
And also, it is like within the parameters of the Bible. In other words, biblically, there have been points where people have said, oh, you want to know that God exists? Well, here's a thing that only my God can do, right? Like that has happened. There are stories of the apostles in the New Testament that have done that. And there are also stories in the Old Testament where that has happened. And I know that because you say biblically so much, you know that these stories exist, right? Like, you know that there are signs and wonders that have been demonstrated to be by God according to the stories and have been used to convince people, right?
The adverb biblically has two meanings. So it means all of reality in the Bible. So you could Google this if you want. So for me to start my sentences with the adverb biblically is a legitimate form of communication because I'm speaking objective truth and not expressing my opinion.
I know you're claiming that. I don't agree that you are.
Well,
how are you discerning that it's objective? How are you discerning that it's objective? Because I'm hearing a lot of assertions, and a lot of the assertions that you've said have been factually wrong. So
yes.
I know also, inside my head, I don't believe in a God. So your objective facts right there are wrong. So maybe provide evidence instead of coming in with more and more assertions. That's why every single host is coming at you, because you keep asserting the same things over and over again. You're not having a back and forth conversation. When we're asking you questions, listen to what we're asking instead of moving on to your next point.
Right. And my exact point for this particular topic was there are people in the Bible who have said, yeah, let me show you what God can do. Right? Like, you agree? Do you agree or disagree with that? I want to know.
Well, I'll address the evidence point first, and then the Bible is that the evidence is the proper noun God. So for you to use the proper noun God, you are appealing to the revelation of God. So in other words, you're
How about
appealing
you
to the
stop
pure.
this and go back to Dan's question, because that's way the hell off topic. And you brought this up every single show. It hasn't changed any minds. So move on to answering Dan's question instead of going to this old assertion.
Addressing your point first, and then I'll address Dan's concern. There's two of you and one of me. So I need to address one of you at a time. So the evidence is the proper
we already
noun
said
God.
you could skip this because
So-
this wasn't evidence. So we can skip.
Yeah.
You can skip answering me. Go to Dan's question.
We disagree with the assertion that using a proper noun is evidence. And I know that we've had that conversation.
I can refer to Spider-Man by his name, Peter Parker. That doesn't mean that Peter Parker exists. So that's bad evidence. It's not. I wouldn't even call it evidence. So move on to the next claim, because this first one was bad.
But the actor for Spider-Man exists. So you're playing word games. So for any
I'm playing word games.
Material. Again, you've asked for the evidence. So at minimum, a sentence is 30 to 40 words. So you need to give him at least more than 20 words to respond to your response.
Well, if you say something wrong within the first 5 words, we don't have to listen to that, and you can move on to answering a proper question. Because if you're already stating bad logic, I don't need to listen to whatever 50 words are coming after that.
Addressing both of you at the same time. So I'm addressing your points first.
Well, I told you to skip my point and go on to Dan's.
Yeah, let's move on.
Well, the Bible, again, as I've stated earlier, is that divine revelation covers both the Bible and the knowledge of God, because in Genesis 1:1, it states, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we know the universe was created because of the knowledge of God.
Can I give a counterpoint? What about the people who existed before the Bible was written, or who are even actors within the Bible stories? How did they know?
Getting to is that even before reading the Bible, we know that a higher power exists through the revelation of God.
Let's talk about this. So if that was true, you don't even have to assert the Bible, right? Like, I would just go to that point first, because that seems to be, if that's true for all human beings, then why would we even need to have the Bible in the first place?
That's a good point.
The Bible is for preaching, teaching, and instruction in righteousness. This comports with 1 Timothy. So to address your earlier points is that even before reading the Bible, we know that a higher power exists, and it just so happens to be that this higher power comports with the proper noun God. So for an eternal, immaterial, infinite in size, all-powerful, all-knowing proper noun to be understood requires revelation from our God of the Bible. So to summarize all of that, for an ultimate proper noun to be understood amid this discussion requires active general revelation from our God of the Bible. So that's the evidence, and this so happens to comport with Genesis 1:1, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So we know before using the scientific method that the universe was created, because matter is irreducibly complex. So in other words, it's 3-dimensional with height, depth, and width. Therefore, matter is...
We let you get in the 40 words now, so you could apparently that was one sentence, that was a lot of assertions.
Let me be allowed to make my response, if I may. So, I have a view of the world, biblically, that puts Christianity and Judaism in its origins at about more or less 3,000 years ago, give or take, maybe extra, maybe 3,500, maybe more so. and it also depends on what you count as the origins, because if you're talking about the original sources that the Jewish people use for writings, it's actually outside of the Jewish faith because there's inspiration from other stories. You get where I'm putting it. But in other words, human history in and of itself has existed for at least 100,000 years, if not more so. And that's just talking about like what we know today as humans, Homo sapiens, right? Going back even farther, we can go into the millions and millions of years for other people and like other beings, other kinds of, apes. So you have to convince me that basically all of that information isn't true, because out of all of human history, for most of it, they did not cite God at all for any of their beliefs. In the grand scheme of human history, this is a very recent invention, and also not an exclusive one, because there are other people of other faiths and of other various beliefs and traditions who have also talked about supreme powers and deities that are mutually exclusive in the claims of the Christian God. So in order for you to convince me biblically that your worldview is true, you have to contest with these facts, the facts that human beings have been around for a really long time. There are mutually exclusive claims that are older than that we have found of Christianity. And basically those two. I mean, because I cannot find a way to reconcile my worldview otherwise. I really can't.
You're possibly presupposing millions/billions of years. So that's not an argument to say that.
I think I've come to that conclusion based on the available evidence. I think that's reasonable to say, because I definitely wasn't born with the belief that the Earth was millions of years old, right? That was definitely taught to me and was definitely studied by other people, and people have come to that conclusions through various methodologies. Yeah. I don't know the methodologies of which you speak of that we determine, oh, well, God is real because we feel it in our hearts. That doesn't seem like a very verifiable methodology to me. It just kind of feels like
most of my thinking with my brain and not my heart. So that's definitely wrong.
So again, I'm appealing to empirical evidence. So the first sentence of the Bible states, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we know that a higher power exists and that
because
the universe was created.
A book saying something is not empirical evidence.
That's not verifiable. Anybody can write anything down in a book, and it doesn't become evidence unless you're able to back it up with science and investigation. And you're not coming up with science and investigation. You're stacking claims on top of claims on top of claims. And you went on for way more than 40 words for your sentences, and you didn't come up with anything that could actually be considered verifiable evidence.
Yeah. Well, and more to that point, right? When we talk about empirical evidence, scientists who really do this work, they actually have to do the work outside of their writings, and then they record their observations. And so that becomes what we call data and what we can work with through there. But that other work has to happen first. Somebody writing down a couple of thousands of years ago, God did this. There's no outside work that has to be involved to do that. In other words, we can't verify it. We can't reproduce it, right? Empiricism and the scientific method relies on reproducibility. So in that sense, like strictly speaking, it is not empirical evidence.
I'm not trying to be condescending here, but I would appreciate it if you take notes. As I stated earlier, is that I'm appealing to divine revelation. So that's both the
Which
Bible
is not empirical evidence.
Again, I've stated this earlier, is that matter, so physical material, is irreducibly complex. So it's made up of parts contingent on our God of the Bible who created...
Have you done any research outside of the Bible on any of this stuff? Because this doesn't sound like you're coming up with factual evidence. It sounds like you're just repeating what you heard in the Bible or heard from preachers. I don't need to take notes on stuff until you start giving me a way of verifying anything that you're saying. Divine revelation means zero to me. I've never been religious, so it's like a nonsense term for me.
The observation, even if it was a legitimate observation that matter is irreducibly complex, which I disagree with.
Yes.
let's say that even if that inference was valid, that's not science. Just saying that, you have to have something that backs that up. What you're using to back that up is the Bible says that.
Yeah, so you should look for
and
ways to test what's in the Bible instead of just
Yeah.
taking its word for it.
It's not, and I don't know that scientists would agree with you on that observation. More and more importantly, that matter is irreducibly complex, because we do have subatomic particles, and we've seemed to go deeper and deeper into what we find to be base reality. So, like, there may be a bottom to it, there may not be. The point is, like, we have to deal with what we can observe, and that by itself, this should not give you the confidence that a God exists, let alone the God of the Christian Bible, especially because the Bible does not talk about matter. It simply does not. That is, I think, a modern interpolation, if anything.
Physical matter is irreducibly complex because it has height, depth, and width. Therefore, it's contingent on parts. So the universe cannot have always existed. Therefore, our God of the Bible created the universe because God is singular by default. So he's not made up of
And
parts.
how do you know that? Have you done anything to investigate God's nature? Because that seems like another assertion.
Yeah. Observations about matter doesn't tell me anything about God. It really doesn't.
I need more time to respond.
I think after multiple calls to us, after talking to us for many times, I think you've gotten plenty of times to respond. And we're at the end of the show here now. And I'm personally not interested in having this conversation any further. So maybe another time, another guest host can have that conversation with you.
Maybe get off the script too, because you'll find that conversations are more conducive when it sounds like the other person's listening instead of waiting for their turn to talk. And I've heard the script a billion times from you on various call-in shows, and it doesn't sound convincing. So listen to what the hosts are saying. I probably won't be here, but there'll be other hosts that'll be happy to hear you engage with them with what they're saying.
Well, on top of that, I also, again, just completely disagree with the claim that, we don't let you talk, we interrupt you. Like, look, yeah, maybe a couple times in this conversation, Josh has been like ready to go, but that's only because he listens to all the shows and he knows and he's heard you and he's not convinced and I'm not convinced. I think we've made our counter arguments. I think we've made our counterpoints to consider. I hope you can consider them. Observations and facts about the known world, including that human beings are evolved and that the earth is billions of years old, are not presuppositions. They're based on, again, empirical evidence, something which you claim to have, which we again disagree with the fact that you do. Divine revelation is not empirical evidence. What the Bible says is not empirical evidence. It doesn't fall under that. And if we want to be true skeptics about the world, if we really want to figure out what is true about our reality, I don't think we can appeal to emotions of the heart. And I also find it very interesting that for somebody who says that, hey, I'm going to cite empirical evidence for my argument, we challenge you with that claim and also say, hey, you say that there's stuff moving in your room. Can you record that? You don't want to present that. Why not? That's also empirical evidence. What is the difference between that and the argument that you're claiming to make? Because if you're saying we can't do this, but we can also do this, it just doesn't make any sense. Why isn't that valid? If we can make empirical arguments for God, that should be considered within the milieu of, your work. Otherwise, you're just saying stuff and we don't know how to verify that. And anybody can call in and say, yeah, I saw stuff move in my room. Okay. Until we can look at it, I don't know what to say about it. Because in my world, stuff doesn't randomly move around in my room. And I don't believe, I don't have a higher power in my heart anymore. I think I felt emotions in church because I was stimulated to do that. But outside of that, I don't think that that's something we can rely on to, base our worldviews on. But hey, I've been talking a lot here and we're at the end of tonight's program. So I want to give a special thanks again to Josh Entner for being on tonight's show. Josh, where can people find you at?
You can find me on the Bloody Good Film podcast. We have skeptic episodes every once in a while. I have some planned in the future, but it's mostly just action and horror conversation and just a fun listen.
Great. And also, as you mentioned, you're on some of the fan groups and stuff.
Yeah, I admin on all the fan groups. So
yeah,
you can find me on
you're
there.
on all of them. So
yeah, you can find me on there, and unless I'm somebody that's already banned you from the group, then you probably can't find me on there anymore. But for the most part, you can find me on there,
including the Truth Wanted fan group on Facebook, which you guys should definitely check out if you haven't already. That's another way to interact with some of the fans of the show, and the hosts make some appearances on there too, to voice their opinions and stuff. So please check that out if you haven't already. But if you want to hear more of our opinions, me and Josh, we are going to be available after this show on the Discord. So if you go to the fan run Discord, the AC Discord account, there's a link to that in the description as well. You can come talk to us, and we're going to be there for the after show. It's going to be Josh's first time attending an after show, which is awesome. And you guys should definitely check that out if you haven't already. So I also just want to remind you guys, thank you to everybody who supports the show, but please consider liking and subscribing on the channel if you're listening to this on YouTube, and please leave a review or comment if you're listening to this anywhere else. And all that kind of engagement really helps us on our side of things, and we pay attention to that stuff. And I do read comments and stuff too, see what you guys think. Hopefully my audio issues are better. I know people were saying my audio sucked. I could tell in the clip there it wasn't that great, but I've been too loud, so hopefully I've quieted down here on this episode of ours. But hey, this has been another great episode of Truth Wanted. Josh, you have any words of wisdom for us before we close out tonight's show?
Everybody should endorse my newspaper class in all your schools.
Please get Josh's newspaper class in your schools. And also, I cannot believe I just did this. I almost forgot to thank the wonderful, fantastic, stupendous crew. Josh is like looking at me like crazy
Unforgivable.
eyes. You guys, we have to thank the wonderful, wonderful crew that helps make this show happen every single week. Here's our crew cam. And Jason is rocking the Truth Wanted beanie tonight, which is fantastic. So Jason's really cool for that. Thank you to everybody who helps make this show happen. You guys rock. I can't believe it. Every time I almost forget the crew cam, I get razzed for it. So I assume I'm going to get razzed for it after the show tonight. That is
deservedly
okay.
so.
I'm all here for it. Whatever you guys want to say about me, that's cool. It's whatever. So remember, folks, that this show can also be found on podcast form in the AEN podcast channel as well. There's a link to that. We didn't show it earlier, so I just want to make sure that that was on screen. But yeah, all the other great shows, including some of the ones you might have saw in the promo, if you're watching on YouTube, you can check that out too. Okay, so I'm done with the plugs. Josh gave his words of wisdom. Everybody take his newspaper class or suggested newspaper class. And I'm here to tell you that you should always keep wanting the truth. And I'll see you next time.
Watch The Non-Prophets and join the hosts in the live chat, Sundays at 3 p.m. Central, between the Atheist Experience and Talk Hidden. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.